So in a previous video, we've created this guard class, and in this video, we are going to write tests for it. So under the test unit utilities, let's create the new class called guard test. Test, there we go. And the namespace is going to be app test unit utilities. And let's extend base case, this app test, this one here. And the first thing we're going to do is use the trait database, because we're going to be interacting with the database when we're using the user class. And then protected function setup. Let's first call parent setup. And then we are going to start the session manager start, so that we know that each test has the session available to it. Okay, and I'm going to create a few new lines to shift it up a little bit. And we're going to start with the first public function is authenticated. Returns false without authenticated user. This is authenticated method. Maybe we should just say is authenticated method returns false without authenticated user. Okay, and let's make it a test. So let's add this test tag. And what we're going to do here is this assert false, and we're going to use parent container, then make method on this container. We're looking for the guard, and then call method is authenticated. And if it fails, then guard is authenticated, returned true without user being authenticated. Okay, let me just go through this line because I know it may be a little bit confusing. If we open our base case, which this class obviously extends, so if I just go there, you'll see we have this container property. You may remember from the previous videos, from within this setup before class, which is run within each class once before any of the tests, we check whether this static container has any value associated with it. With this exclamation mark, we're checking for the opposite. If it's not, then obviously that would indicate that we haven't set it to anything yet. So we setting this container to the new to the instance of the new container. Then we bind two items to this container: the request, which is basically instance of the Illuminate request, and then instance of the guard, which is instance of this guard class which we've just created. And then we run kernel, obviously, and pass this container through. So what we're doing here, we get this container, and in order to get back what we bound to the container, we need to use this make method and then pass through the argument of the item that we want to pull out of the container. And in this case, it's this guard. So this is basically going to be the instance of this guard class. And on this guard class, then we call this is authenticated, because obviously this is one of the methods, if we go back to the guard, which we've created in a previous video. So this method on this specific class instance is being called here when we calling this parent container, make guard, and then is authenticated. So let's give it a try. Let's see if it's passing. So back to the terminal, make sure that you're in the correct directory. So pwd, I'm in a code login, which is where I should be. And now PHP unit, and I'm going to run just this test. So tests, then unit, then utilities, and guard test. And there we go, we've got some problem here. Okay, it tells me that call to undefined method, session manager start. Let's just quickly go back here. We've imported session manager, but we don't seem to have the session start method. Well, of course, because I've imported the wrong session manager. Illuminate session package also contains the session manager class, so that's not the one that we actually want. Let's just import the correct one, which is this app utilities session manager, the one that we've created actually, not the one that comes with the Illuminate package. So if you run this test again, let's clear the screen, Command K on the keyboard, and there we go. We've got one test, one assertion, and it passes. So obviously this is authenticated method returned false, which it should, because we didn't authenticate any user yet. So what we're going to do next from within another method, let's create a new test, public function logs user in and is authenticated authenticated method returns true. So this time we're going to log the user in and then run the same method, which this time should return true. So again, let's make it a test. And we're going to start with user equals and then user create. Let's pass an array of items here, and let's import this user class, and it's going to be app models user. So that should be added right here at the top. And for the name, we're going to say Sebastian Suliński. For the email, we're going to say info@ssdtutorials.com. And for the password, we just say secret. And now what we're going to do is call parent again container make guard. So again, at this point, we have instance of the guard class pulled out of the container. And now we call login method to log this user in. We pass user instance as an argument, so that should log in the user. And now when we run this assert true in this case, and let me just call the same thing that we had here, because that's exactly the same thing that we need. So we call this parent container make guard is authenticated. This time should return true. Otherwise, we're going to say guard is authenticated, returned false with authenticated user. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Let's now go back to the terminal, run the test again, and there we go. We've got two tests, two assertions, all of which are passing. So what we've managed to prove here is that when we log in the user, then is authenticated returns true. When we don't log in the user at all, then is authenticated will return false, which is exactly how we want it. Okay, so the next test will get us the instance of the user after we've logged the user in. So public function returns user instance after login, and then test tag, and we're going to start user equals, actually, do you know what? Why am I going to be typing the same thing over and over again? Let's just copy what we've got here, including this login method, call to this method. So there we go, we've got this user, and then we're going to go for the guard equals parent, then we call container make guard again, and on this instance of a guard, we're going to call a method user, which should return instance of the user. So rather than calling a user, which would override this previous variable, we call it guard now, which also obviously represents instance of a user. And now we're going to do this assert equals, and we're going to pass through two arrays. We're going to compare them together. So basically properties of the user instance before we log the user in and after we log the user when we actually fetch the same user basically through the guard user method. So we're going to start user ID, then user name, then we have user email, and then we have user password. This should match guard ID, guard name, guard email, and guard password. So these should be exactly two exactly same arrays, because these values should be exactly the same, because that should supposed to be the same user after the login. Okay, so what we're going to do before we actually test it, let's add the message in case it fails. Guard user does not return correct user instance. Okay, let's save it and test it. There we go. And we've got three tests, three assertions, which means they are all passing. Great. So the next method and the last test of this class is going to check whether the user has been logged out. So public function logout logs user out. And let's make it a test again. and scroll up so we can actually see what we're doing. And we start again with the same thing. So let's just copy this stuff. So user, and then we log user in. Let's paste it here. We could probably extract it to another method, but let's just keep it here. It's only 3 methods that use it. Then this assert true. And again, parent, container, make guard, and then is authenticated, just to make sure that we definitely are logged in. Although we've checked this, we've tested for it already, but before we actually run the following assertion, I want to make sure that yes, we definitely have the instance of the user there. Okay, guard login did not log user in, if in case it failed. So let's just test this first. So there we go. And there we go, for test for assertions. Now we're going to add another assertion after we've called logout method. So parent container make guard, and on this guard instance we want to call method logout. And now if I copy this previous assertion, but this time rather than true, it's going to be false. That's what we're expecting. And message will say log, let's just remove all this, guard logout did not log user out. So first of all, what we're doing, creating the user, then we log this user in, at which point this is authenticated should return true. Then we log the user out, and obviously the assertion then we are setting that it's going to be false when we call is authenticated, because that's what it should return after we've logged the user out. Okay, let's save it and test it. And we should have, yeah, and there we go. We've got 4 tests and 5 assertions, all of which are passing, which tells us that our guard class is acting the way we wanted it to. Okay, I think that's it for this video. We've covered our guard class and its associated tests, so let's move to the next one.